This is one that's been interesting, and this is relevant to a lot of our clients, and it maybe is a little bit more tactical in nature. But the question that we've been discussing with a lot of our partners is how is this remote work situation impacting traditional organizational structures? And for some folks that are already working, in a remote working situation, this isn't new. But for a lot of folks, I don't know what percent folks work at home. It's certainly on the 20 side of that 80-20. But how do you really deal with this as a leader, and what does this how does this impact how you are moving through your daily agenda with your team, and what does this really reveal about your organization and your leadership style, and how do we do this successfully?
I think one of the really cool byproducts of what's happening now is that we collectively as kind of the business community haven't spent a lot of time questioning the things that we do in terms of how we're structured, how we're doing business. And it really, when you look back from a history perspective, the corporate structure and the way we operated from this autocratic way of doing things came from the military. And that served us really well through, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and up until, for a lot of companies, until very recently. And the reality is there has been these incremental pushbacks, if you will, people starting to go a little more virtually, and telecommuting and flex hours and all these different things have kind of bubbled up. And that's just these tiny little things that have just kind of been emerging. And Microsoft just did their big analysis about people working remotely and found out productivity went up 40%. And so the data is starting to catch up with that. And the reality is we're force fed now. We just we don't have any say so in this. We got to figure it out. And the companies that have figured out some of the virtual work certainly are ahead of the game. But the reality is, I think it's starting to get the leaders to question everything. And the old hierarchy and all these different strata of the organizational chart. And I think it's going to flatten everything. This is my personal opinion. I think that there's going to be more of this matrix and team, and some organizations certainly have embraced this over time. But I think the organizations that haven't are going to really, right now, forced to relook at how they're structured and how they go about doing business and bringing bodies into a big building every day and having them spend, stuff, gas money and time and burning up stuff in the environment. And I think that all of us are rethinking the way we're doing business. And with that goes the hierarchy and the structural piece. And I just think things are going to get flattened. And I think the other really cool thing that I'm hearing happening is that some people at some of the lower levels that have kind of just been doing their jobs and under the radar, some of these folks are just popping up like, shooting stars. And they've embraced this, and they've figured out, okay, I can thrive. It's like they've remade themselves. So they figured out that they can thrive in this environment because of X, Y, and Z. And I think it's just help people shift in a lot of ways their thinking in terms of where they may fit into the organization. And I think you look at ultimately from a metric standpoint and from an expense standpoint, I think we're going to rethink a lot of how we're spending money with getting people into offices. And that, I think it's going to shift.
Yeah, I think the shift is a focus on outcomes, right? And that's what everyone's moving towards. When you talk about remote work, everyone's focused on
Yeah.
their role and what they are able to provide to the organization, and all in the pursuit of the best outcome, as opposed to the old button seat. So I love this. I think this is the good, one of the good things that may come out of this, and it's that, that smack to the head, that duh moment, like, oh, okay, we don't need to be in the office.
Yeah.
And it's been hard to motivate folks to embrace this, remote work opportunity. And so I think this forcing function is again, back to our Morph IT level of fate. We're loving that we're learning the lesson of how you can remote work successfully and embrace that. So I do hope that people continue this method and continue the openness of having employees contributing and focusing on outcomes from home, and we don't go back to the old way, quote unquote. So it'll be interesting to see how this one.
Some will. I think one of the really, really interesting things that's going to happen is that if indeed we're going down that path, and I think that we're there, what happens on the social side? Because businesses have been such as, the universe for a lot of people from a social standpoint. So what's going to shift for people? Where are they going to find that? How are these new groups going to emerge that support them? How are they going to find these new communities? How are the existing communities within organizations going to reform in a different, even cooler way? When you can't stop by and, share a cup of coffee with somebody in the office, what's going to replace that? Because people need that. And I think that's where, as leaders, we need to be thinking about that in terms of exploring that right now with people. How are we going to replace this whole social aspect and modify it, and maybe not replace it, but it's going to be new and it's going to be different. And so how are we open to what that new thing may look like, and how do we support it from an organizational standpoint?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we always talk about the walking meetings and going to grab coffee and using the parks that we have available to us. Now, of course, this is all post, the shelter in place rules, but once we're able to interact again, yeah, it will be interesting to see that you do need that face-to-face time, and there's appropriate conversations and experiences, and you got to build your culture, and you need to interact with folks. But how do you do it? Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how this unfolds. And there's tons of opportunities outside the workplace. We always talk about it when people are in there, getting them out. So now they're out. So
they're out. Yeah, it's going to be really cool to see how this evolves.